Today on the HopeFilled Financial Podcast, we're going to start by discussing Halloween candy and how my siblings and I managed our stash of loot. For our budget tip today, we're going to talk about how if you're starting budgeting, how do you estimate what to spend on groceries? Our listener question asks if you can make more money if you skip going to college. And finally, for our main topic, we're going to be going through a required minimum distribution conversion example. This main topic gets real. If you're excited for today, please like, follow, and subscribe. Good morning and welcome to the HopeFilled Financial Podcast. My name is Jay Disberger, your one and only HopeFilled Financial Coach, and I'm happy that you're here with us today. To start today, I want to talk about what trick-or-treating was like for me and my siblings. I had 5 younger siblings, and back when I was young enough to go trick-or-treating, it was a blast. I remember going out with the pillowcases or the little pumpkin buckets and collecting a ton of loot. If the little pumpkin buckets actually weren't enough, the neighborhood had a few houses too that gave the full-size candy bars, the good stuff. One of my favorite parts of Halloween night was getting back from trick-or-treating and dumping out all the loot onto the floor and sorting it. I used to sort the different types of candy bars, separate the chocolate from the hard candy, and count up what I had. Then I would engage with a little bit of trading with my siblings. Some of them liked candy I didn't like, and some of them had a bunch of my favorite, which would be Twix. And after that, we got to enjoy some of the candy, but my parents had a few rules in place. One of the rules was you couldn't have too much candy all at once, but there were fun rules too. Like the day after Halloween, you got to have a Halloween candy after your breakfast. There was like no other day out of the year we got to have dessert after breakfast. And you'd have one after lunch, and after dinner the next day, you'd get a candy after lunch and one after dinner. Subsequently after that, you'd typically get one candy a day until it was gone. Now, just because there were rules doesn't mean that the rules weren't broken. It became a tradition for my parents to have to take our Halloween candy and hide them because, well, some of us didn't want to pace ourselves when it came to candy consumption. We wanted to have a little bit more, and we wanted to have it a little bit sooner. So my parents found all sorts of creative hiding spaces, and we would go hunting for our Halloween candy if we weren't wanting to follow the rules. Hi, Mom. Anyway, it was interesting to see how our behavior actually impacted how long our candy lasted. Some of us would go through the candy very quickly, and others, like my brother Jonathan, were very good at pacing their candy out, and they'd probably still have some come Christmas time. There were days Jonathan would even skip candy because he didn't want it. That's not even a phrase in my vocabulary. I thought this was extreme until I met my wife. She probably still has some candy from 10th grade. Anyway, different natures lend themselves to delaying gratification in order to spread out the joy differently. Some of us went whole hog and wanted to get it out of the way. Some of us saved it for a long time. And some of us saved it so long that the candy would go bad. Sad. No matter how you shake it, when you compare different methods for candy consumption, there are trade-offs. And I want you to remember that as we move into the main topic later. But for now, it's time for today's budget tip. A budget tip is about how to estimate your groceries when you're first starting budgeting. It's a common thing when I'm working with clients to see that they don't know how much they're spending on food. If you think you know how much you're spending on food and you're not running a monthly budget, you're not tracking things, you're not actually keeping an eye on the finances, well, you probably have to take what you think you're spending on food and double it. It's a lot. So when you're starting, you could say, well, I'll just double my best guess, but that's not always good enough when it comes to getting close on a realistic and achievable budget for your groceries. So what's the best way to start? I would say you want to pick somewhere between $200 and $300 per adult person. If you have children and they're younger, well, very young children, you don't need to budget near that much for them. But once they hit those teen growth spurts, you might need to put more in there for them than you do for yourself. But that's a great place to start. If you are not practiced with budgeting, you need to give yourself a little bit more room in the grocery budget so you can give yourself a little bit more grace and a little bit more forgiveness. You don't have to spend up to it, but be on the higher end when you start. estimating around $300 a person or so, especially if you're in a very high living expense area. You might end up being a little higher than $300 a person. And as you practice your budget, you can work it down closer to $200 per person. I think $200 per person, at least in the area where I live, is reasonable. That's a decent place to be for your food budget. If you're getting out of debt, I know there are ways that you can squeeze it down lower than that. And if you make plenty of money, don't feel bad putting a little bit more than $200 per month, per person, per groceries. Back to knowing that you can get it down, back when I lived in Omaha and I was an intern and I made almost no money, I was able to live on, I think it was around $21, $22 a week on groceries. That's what I spent at the grocery store to feed myself for a summer. So less than $100 for myself. Now that was a little while ago and I know things have gone up, but imagine if you could get the cost down in a really tight situation when you really need to be dedicating money toward an emergency or you're saving or your debt. Well, it's possible. It just takes a lot of discipline, intentionality, and frugality. I sincerely hope that budget tip helps some of you out there. Now it's time to answer a question submitted by you. Today's question comes from John. John asks, as a high school student, can I make more money skipping college, skipping student loans, getting 4 more years in the workforce, and starting retirement investing early? My uncle has a construction company where I can start right away at $22 an hour. I could alternatively study construction science at a university. All right, John, this is a great question, and to answer it, I'm going to have to make some assumptions about your particular situation and some assumptions about the future. This is just a way of estimating and an example of how you could go about the problem solving. It's in no way the exact solution for you, as I can't predict the future, and there are factors about you as a person that I don't know. But I can do a reasonable job doing an estimate. So what I have here, if you're watching the video, is a spreadsheet that I put together. Some of the calculations are hidden, but this first one is how much money would you make skipping college and tracking your nest egg. I made a few assumptions to figure this out. I assumed that 7% growth would be what you could get on an investment after inflation. I believe that's a reasonable assumption. I also assumed that you get regular raises, and I put those in the spreadsheet in today's money. And I assumed that you were going to invest 15% of your take-home pay into retirement. So the first column here I have is your age, from age 18 to age 60. That's the duration of the example I put together. I assumed that with $22 an hour after taxes, you'd make about $35,000 a year. And I worked that up to, at age 60, making $46,914. So you started around $35,000 take-home pay, and that's after taxes. And all the numbers I put in the spreadsheet are corrected for inflation. So if you can see the video, all the numbers up to 60 years old, where I say you make roughly $47,000 a year, that's take-home pay in today's money. The actual nominal value will be much higher when you're 60 following these assumptions. If we look back at the spreadsheet, though, what we see is you start investing right away, and you can invest over $5,000 in today's money right off if you were to go into the workforce at the rate your uncle can pay you. And it's a good pay for the construction industry looking at averages for my area. And that investment pattern leads you to making a retirement nest egg of $1.5 million in today's money. That's pretty good. And over the lifetime of your career, with my assumptions, again, they're all just assumptions, you end up with a total earned income of $1.7 million. So that's roughly how much money you make over the working career. The next part of the spreadsheet I have assumes that you go to college and you manage to go to school completely debt-free. I assumed that you work still while you're in school and you make only $25,000 a year take-home pay. And that can include scholarships, by the way. I assumed that you pay $20,000 a year for tuition, so $80,000 for a 4-year degree in construction science. That's the guess here. You could probably hit that if you did some of the years at a community college and then hit up a state university that was reasonable and got good scholarships. The assumption I have here is that you stay debt-free, so you pay your way through. Your only net gain is around $5,000 a year savings, and that's probably reasonable for a college student paying their way through and working. After that, the average starting salary, corrected for today's money, is around $40,000 for a construction science major if you went right into construction management. So I say at age 22, that's where you start. And on the high end for construction science in today's money, you'd actually be closer to $70,000 after the working career has taken you to age 60. So you're able to make more money per year after going to university. I mean, that's the goal. If you didn't, why would you go to university? Why would you study a degree that's not marketable and wouldn't make you more than what you could do just leaving high school? That would be kind of silly. So if you follow this path, you end up making more money over the working career. You make $2.1 million in today's money using my assumptions, but your nest egg is actually less than what I calculated for someone going right into work, right out of high school. It's by, what is it? Less than 100,000, but it's still less than. And that means that those 4 years that you would have spent in university, just investing $5,000 a year there is enough to tip the scales and end up with a bigger nest egg. Time really is the most powerful thing when it comes to investing. I put my assumptions here if you can see the video at the bottom of the screen, and we've basically already talked through them, but they're repeated for good due diligence. Now, I did do a third example, and that's going to school and getting a standard student loan. I assumed that you worked and you earned $25,000 every year, just like the last example, but you didn't pay for any of your tuition. You put it all on student loans. You put $80,000 in today's money in student loans. So then you go back into the workforce, construction science, construction management, and you start at age 22. I had the salary be the exact same that it was in the last example, starting around $41,000 a year take-home pay and ending at $67,000, $68,000 take-home pay in today's money. Now, if you see the spreadsheet, it's kind of peculiar. I have the student loan payments under the education expense column, the last column, and they become less and less in today's money. Well, that's because the fixed amount you'd be paying in student loans becomes less and less in today's money the further you get out. So I've corrected for inflation there, and it shrinks. But the amount that you have to pay in student loans for the next 10 years, you don't get out of this until you're 32, is going to far and away every year exceed what you were investing per year in the last example. So I assumed another caveat here, and that caveat is you don't invest for retirement until your student loan is paid off because you can't afford it. That assumption is relatively reasonable. It assumes that you want to have the same standard of living as you did if you were debt-free. I should mention on the bottom of the sheet, I list that I assumed the student loan was at 7% interest for 10 years and that you kept up with it. And I think that is everything that I needed to assume there. But if we look at the total amount that you earn over the lifetime of your working career, it's higher. It's higher than when you skip college completely, but it's not as high as what it was in the last example where you made it to school and you made it out debt-free. And that's because I deduct from the take-home pay what you paid to the student loans. You technically didn't get to keep that money like when you were investing it. The other thing is because you had to delay your retirement investing by a total of, I think, 14 years. You didn't start until age 32. The nest egg in this example is only $750,000 by the time it's all said and done. And that's abysmal compared to double that. So getting through college debt-free in my assumptions just at a glance can double your retirement nest egg, or in other words, getting student loans and paying them off for 10 years can cut your nest egg potential, following these rules, in half. And the rules we followed were the ones that are promoted by Dave Ramsey. Save 15% for retirement after you're debt-free. I hope that helps answer your question. I know that what I put forward here isn't the exact solution, but you can apply these same problem-solving techniques. You can run the numbers in a similar spreadsheet and figure out what kind of income out of school, given your area where you are, the average construction management degree income versus construction worker income for your area. Run the numbers and compare them and figure out, is it total amount earned that matters to you? Is it the total nest egg? Is it getting out there and working? And how much do you value the experience of going to school and staying in school for another 4 years? Does that really add any value to your life? Does it enrich your life in any way? Does it help you become a more well-rounded person that is not as tangible, something that isn't monetizable? That's something that you might want to ask yourself too. John, I do hope that my answer helps you. Now it's time to move on to today's main topic. For today's main topic, I got to give a little disclaimer. The disclaimer is copied down in the description in its fullness, but what I'm about to do is not investment advice. The example I'm going to show you is for educational purposes only, and the assumptions are only perfectly valid within the tool that I have, the spreadsheet that I made. And the spreadsheet that I made, admittedly, is using tax law from 2021, 2022. So it's a little out of date, but the example we're going to run through is still important for your financial education. If you can see the video, there's a mildly intimidating looking spreadsheet that's in front of us. I'm going to talk through the situation that is reflected by the current inputs, and then we're going to talk about the graphs that populate down below and discuss some of the actions that can be taken in order to help mitigate the risks that required minimum distributions can expose us to. So what we have right now is a 30-year-old couple, husband and wife are both 30 years old, and together their income, their MAGI before taxes, is $80,000. That's a reasonable income. And there's some calculated stuff about their taxes that's really not important for understanding the example, but just know that the spreadsheet corrects for tax brackets and factors there that get complicated, too complicated to explain in the scope of today's main topic. Let's go into the particulars for their retirement. At age 30, they have $40,000 saved up in traditional investments. They started by investing in traditional sorts of retirement accounts. Later were introduced to Roth and decided they wanted to try pushing into Roth, or their employer went from offering traditional only employee-sponsored retirement accounts to having a Roth option. That's quite valuable. So they switched over to putting the money in their retirement-sponsored account to Roth. The employer contributions are still going to traditional, and they match 100% of what you put in. So right now they're putting in $5,000 that goes directly into their Roth portion of their 401ks or their employee accounts. And there's a match of $5,000 that goes in there, but it's traditionally invested. So each year, Roth and traditional get $5,000 in contributions. We're going to assume that doesn't change for this example. We're going to do everything in today's money. Let's assume that this couple wants to retire at age 60, right after they can access their retirement monies. For the purposes of this spreadsheet, it's conservative to estimate a higher growth because we're looking at how required minimum distributions can exceed a safe withdrawal rate. So you want to be a little aggressive. So I popped in 11% for how much growth we expect their investment portfolio to do. I popped in 3% for assumed inflation. You actually want to be on the lower end. So if you assume 3 to 4%, popping in 3 in the spreadsheet is going to be more conservative. Net growth for their investments is going to be 8%, then 11 minus 3 equals 8. Now I'm going to move to the upper right table. The upper right table shows some information about their retirement strategy. They want to, again, retire at age 60. That's when they are going to no longer have any earned income. Their nest egg, using the numbers we've assumed, if they continue contributing at the assumed growth rate, again assumed, in today's money they'll have $1.7 million. Woohoo, that's great. They plan on implementing a safe withdrawal rate of 4%. They follow the 1998 Trinity study, and they want to stick with it. It's going to just be flat. That'll give them an annual income in today's money in retirement of just under $70,000. If you talk with almost any financial advisor, they're going to tell you once you hit retirement, you want to favor your traditional account first and start paring that down before digging into Roth. Now, that's not a blanket statement. It's not financial advice. It's just something that, is something you hear a lot. So this couple is going to start, in this example, by taking money out of their traditionally invested funds and then taking out a Roth after the traditional is worn down. They, in this case, would like to leave as much of the Roth money to their kids as possible, and they know that that money that they leave to the kids, if it's in Roth, can grow tax-free for another 10 years. The rest of the spreadsheet talks about what they can do today to convert traditional money into Roth money. The last bit, results by life expectancy, we say they expect to live until age 95. And there's a little toggle that either says yes or no. Do required minimum distributions exceed your intended safe withdrawal rate? And in this answer, it says yes right now. Warning. Well, this couple wants to take 4% out because that is what they believe is going to leave them at acceptable levels of risk for not running out of money in retirement. However, the IRS on the traditional money, their traditionally invested retirement nest egg, they're going to impose required minimum distributions, or RMDs. We can see when we look at the first graph here that required minimum distributions really start to heavily impact how much they're taking out of retirement right around age 84. Now, that's not necessarily when RMDs kick in, but that's when RMDs are going to start exceeding their safe withdrawal rate of 4%. We can see that up to that point, the amount of taxes that they're paying from their distributions from traditional accounts is static, and then it climbs. The next graph down here, the one that is Broncos orange and blue, represents the balance of the nest egg. It always equals 100%. Orange is going to be traditional. Blue is Roth. What we see is right now, they're primarily invested in traditional at age 30. And the Roth account is the minority of their nest egg. And as they invest and things grow, it evens out around a 40-60 split. Right at 60, when they start taking money out, you'll see that the amount of traditional shrinks and Roth takes over up to a point that's well beyond life expectancy. This last graph that I show, if you have the video, is the most important, in my opinion, to consider while looking at this problem. The yellow line represents the retirement income from traditional investments. Now, the blue also equals the same thing, but it's the amount that is applied from required minimum distributions. So right around age 69, it looks like, is the last year where RMDs didn't mean anything. Right around age 70, they kick in. And the RMD requires more than 50% of what they need to take out. And it ever increases until right around that point of 83, where required minimum distributions equals or exceeds their safe withdrawal rate. The blue line comes up and above this orange line. The orange line represents the intended distribution that they want to take out from their nest egg total. So if that blue line bumps above, that's when we get the little warning. Yes, your required minimum distributions are putting your safe withdrawal rate strategy at risk. You're not going to be able to follow it practically in retirement. Eventually, it does come back down, but we don't need to talk about that because it happens after 100 years old, and we said we are running this example for 95. So what can we do to fix this? Well, first, what we could do is consider moving a lump sum, rolling over a lump sum of the traditional money into the Roth money right now. Now, if everything is invested in an employer account, an employer-sponsored retirement account, they're going to need to talk to the manager of their 401k, 403b, whatever it may be, and ask if this is something that's possible. For some people, it's not. And just because it isn't a possibility now, if you ask, it doesn't mean it can't become a possibility later. That's something that happened to me in my past. But let's say that they can. Let's say they're able to move $6,000 of their traditionally invested money now. Again, they have $40,000 today at age 30, and they move that over to Roth. Well, that increases their tax burden for this year by $1,200, a little more than that. But by doing so, just that one lump sum keeps the blue line below their intended withdrawal rate. So by just moving that little bit of money, they're able to be safe. And that was the big thing we were concerned about. So an additional $1,200 in taxes today solves their problem the way things are mapped out, assuming everything else stays static. That's kind of cool. I think that's a very easy solution if you wanted to do something today and then not worry about it and check in on it later. And they could do a little bit more if they wanted to be a little more safe, but there's also something else that's really cool. On this cell right here, 46F, if you can see the video, the total amount of taxes under the original assumptions, the total amount of taxes they'd pay in retirement equaled $237,000. If they made that conversion today and spent an extra $1,200 today in taxes, it drops their total tax exposure over their lifetime to $178,000. That is a substantial improvement, but I think we could do better. Let's say that they're not able to do this one lump sum, and they don't want a quick and easy fix, and they want to kind of manage this a little bit more. They want to be a little bit more involved with this retirement strategy because they're worried about their overall tax exposure. They want to, on the whole, minimize how much money they give to the government over the span of their life. So they say, well, the money that my employer is investing, let's take it from the traditional and roll it over to the Roth every single year. Again, we're assuming that's something that they can do. If they do that every year for that $5,000, it gives them an extra $990 in taxes. Not quite $1,000, but that's every year until they retire. The amazing thing is how much that reduces their overall taxes. Remember, it was over $200,000 in tax exposure for the initial example. By rolling that money over from traditional to Roth every year, their overall tax exposure is now only $60,000. And that doesn't include rolling over what they have today. If they were to take all of the money that they have saved up in traditional and roll it all to Roth today and then do an annuity type rollover every year where you take the traditional contributions, move it over, you minimize your overall exposure to taxes to only $37,000. That's crazy. We took it from over $200,000 to under $40,000 in tax exposure on the spreadsheet. And there's one more thing we can do to get it lower, and that's going to be called the Roth conversion ladder. I don't have time to explain it today, so subscribe if you want to catch an episode where I do. But effectively, it's going to be rolling money over from traditional to Roth after you retire in a way that doesn't get taxed because you stay below the 0% tax bracket. So let's say instead of rolling everything over today, they do half of it. They take $20,000 of their $40,000 that's in traditional, move it to Roth. Then, in retirement, they prioritize taking money out of their Roth account instead of the traditional account. They do the opposite of the standard advice. But they also prioritize a Roth conversion ladder. Well, if they do that, well, they can get their tax exposure a little lower, closer to $30,000. And what we're essentially doing here is saying, let's have a little bit of money in the traditional today that grows and can be mitigated before RMDs really kick in. I don't know if $20,000 is the smallest they can do, so I'm going to try $15,000. $15,000 ended up in a little bit more taxes. $20,000 might actually be the sweet spot. I think I might have nailed it. $33,000 in overall tax exposure for their retirement strategy seems to be about as low as I can get it on the spreadsheet in short order. But this goes to show that by taking some intentional and educated approaches to our retirement plan, we can reduce our taxes, in this example, by over $200,000. That's crazy. Now, that's the kind of lesson that I wish could be taught in schools around the country. That's the kind of stuff that I wish that everyone who graduates from high school, everyone who graduates from college can understand right up. This isn't something that I've ever seen in a personal finance class. It's not anything that I've even seen on YouTube or in a podcast before. And it's something that I'm very honored to be able to share with you today. Next week, I'm going to be doing an interview with a registered financial expert who's going to help us understand insurance, most particularly life insurance. Not the most fun thing to talk about. It's not something that we all like to think about, but it's very important. If you want to learn about life insurance, the difference between term and whole, and other fun insurance topics, please subscribe and don't miss next week's episode. Until then, until next Tuesday, budget bravely and enjoy your hope-filled financial future.